Welcome to Noon Hour Slides from the Moose Jaw Museum and Art Gallery. We're located on Treaty 4 territory with the traditional lands of the Blackfoot, Cree, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We pay our respects to First Nations and Métis elders and ancestors and reaffirm our relationship with one another. We gratefully acknowledge funding from the City of Moose Jaw, Sask Arts, Sask Culture, Saskatchewan Lotteries, Canada Council for the Arts, Canadian Heritage, and the Government of Canada. I'm Vincent Hotelling, the administrative assistant here. I'm here to welcome you to the first in this series, my own trip to see the solar eclipse in 2017. You want syzygy? You want broken treaties? You want cholera, PPE, the KKK, mini golf, wine tasting, and tacky souvenirs? You've come to the right talk. So to help me with this, joining us all the way from Bear River, Nova Scotia, Gregory Muskie.
Hello.
So to set the scene, the year was 2006. We're in class thinking about physics as we were wont to do. And my friend Greg tells me to mark the calendar for August 21st, 2017, which at the time didn't quite seem like a real date because it was so far in the future.
Yeah.
But we're going on to Kentucky to see the solar eclipse. A few years pass, we get music degrees, perform a bit, have a good time, and suddenly it's 2017 and the calendar notification pops up. And while Kentucky would give the longest totality, we were adults at this point, and the trip we could do most quickly for the least money. And that was good enough. Yeah. And so we still picked a cool place along the path, but it was a little closer, and we went to Wyoming. And so we're going to talk about eclipses today, and it's good to be good fun. But the question becomes, what is an eclipse? Simply, a solar eclipse happens when the moon is in the exact right spot in its orbit to block the Earth from seeing the sun at a spot where it normally would. What you need is for the moon to be between the Earth and sun. This is always during a new moon, when the back of the moon is illuminated, which happens every month. And the plane of the moon's orbit of the Earth is slightly out from the Earth's orbit of the sun. You need them to intersect. The moon must be exactly in line. And this only happens every year and a half or so. And even then, it's not always perfect. If you have an eclipse one month, the next month, the moon will be above or below where it was. And the moon needs to be near Earth in its orbit. If all these things happen, you get a proper eclipse, and you know well in advance that it's going to happen. You know when you book to go to the next one.
Mm-hmm. And so, first of all, I'd like to first talk and consider about the early solar system. So in the beginning, it was very much different. Today, we observe very stable orbits throughout the system and a relatively equidistant space between all of the planets, very circular orbits, more or less. And then we see asteroids here or there. But when the sun turned on and began to fuse hydrogen in its core, it revealed the protoplanetary disk, which is effectively a bunch of orbiting rocks, dust, and gas just spread out throughout the system. It was absolute chaos, and it took billions of years for everything to stabilize and cool off. And as an aside, a very cool feature of the early solar system is that Mercury may in fact be a remnant core of a gas giant, as most of the common exoplanets that we do observe in other systems tend to be called hot Jupiters, and they are so extremely close to their star that they get all of their atmosphere stripped away. And that's probably what we are actually left with. But back to the moon, it is still very highly debated when and how and when, the moon formed around Earth, although the best estimate is that it is about 4.5 billion years old. This massive collision with a Mars-sized object, or as they were known at that stage in the solar system's history, protoplanets, meaning pre-planet. These protoplanets coalesced together in amounts, and they formed the planets we know today. But the object that collided with Earth liquefied both bodies, spreading debris throughout the inner solar system. And this was a contribution of the late heavy bombardment period, which may have been caused by a star entering our solar system, or perhaps a wandering planet from another, or one of our own planet's unstable orbits. These events likely kicked out other earthly bodies from the solar system entirely, creating what we know today as rogue planets, which is where you get those legends of Nibiru. But these are things that we've been finding in interstellar space all the time. So much of the speculation of our history is derived from observations made in these other proto-systems, and a lot of it is still very speculative. We can only infer so much from these kinds of things, but it is our best guess. But the best we can do is measure, make predictions and comparisons, and we've done a pretty good job so far. So the moon would have just formed just outside the Roche limit, which is the distance from a planetary body such that it will disintegrate another by sheer tidal forces alone. Say the forces holding the smaller body intact would be overtaken by the gravity of the larger body. The same thing would happen to you if you got too close to a black hole, kind of like a spaghettification kind of thing, where all of your atoms would be just kind of elongated. But this is likely also what caused Saturn to gain its rings. It's estimated that they are only about 10 to 100 million years old, which in geological time makes Saturn's rings quite a lot rarer than a phenomenon like the eclipse. But again, back to the moon, the angle of the collision was very important. It ensured that we had a spin, seasonal cycles. It gave the moon its signature precession, as Vincent mentioned earlier. It prevented the Earth from being jostled out of its planetary orbit. It added mass, all of which were very important to creating the conditions for life, especially the electromagnetic dynamo, which shields us from solar radiation. So over time, the debris coalesced into the mass that it mostly is today. And this liquefied rock state was important because those tidal stresses over time placed a drag on the moon's orbit, forcing it to recede over time. It works the same way today, except with water instead of rock, which is, although a far smaller effect, it still allows the moon to escape our orbit by about 4 centimeters, like this much every year, which is amazing that we can calculate it, but we can do that. It's not negligible either. Over time, billions of years into the future, what's going to happen is that the moon will get far enough such that it won't align with the sun anymore. It will always be that ring effect, which we'll get to later. So those tides that we observe today are really what that is just an aqueous bulge that forms on both sides of the planet, and there's a love-hate relationship. No, it's just a tidal relationship that we have with the moon. Although, let's see here. So in the future, they won't be visible, but looking at the opposite direction in time, the moon actually used to be a lot closer, as I said. But that would have meant that eclipses used to be a lot more frequent and longer. Initially forming at about 2 Earth diameters away, it would have been a monthly occurrence. And when I say month, I mean it proverbially, as the month back then would have been a little more than a day. And so, yes, a daily, immense, hours-long eclipse, and no one around to witness it but bacteria, which I find fun. Although dinosaurs would have also had a very great view. Hundreds of millions of years ago, the moon would have still been rather close, and eclipses were somewhat more frequent, longer, and attributed to a darker sky. Not perhaps the sunset-like sky that we saw, but quite a bit darker. And it is important to note that they do differ in quality. It is a very nice coincidence that the sun and moon are about the same relative size in the sky. And this is because the moon's size and distance is roughly the same ratio as the sun's size and distance from us. So because the moon is on an uneven non-circular orbit, it may appear larger or smaller in the sky, thus the term supermoon or micromoon that has gained popularity in the last decade or so. The moon will appear larger or smaller by a factor of about 7% from the mean, or about 14% from one extreme to the other, and that's why it seems so significant. So the furthest point from the Earth in the moon's orbit is called the apogee, and the closest point is called the perigee. So there are two kinds of precessions, and that's why we only get eclipses so often. How it's moves in front and then beside. It has an apsidal precession and a planar precession, which means there's lots of variance of where and when we'll find these eclipses. So a partial solar eclipse is when the moon does not cover the sun completely. This results in a devil's horn eclipse, particularly when it's observed in conjunction with the horizon. You'll see it rise like such, or through disparate clouds, you can kind of see it. And so when it's a direct alignment, but it's not fully covered, it's known as the Ring of Fire, which was observed just a few years ago in Japan, if I'm correct. So with all these, we can figure out exactly where and when and for how long an eclipse occurs. And we're very good at measuring this today, so much so that we can actually take advantage of it and do some science. One of the earliest contributions from astronomers was from Sir Arthur Eddington. He was keen to test out Einstein's theories about space-time, and he heeded the direction of Sir Frank Dyson in preparation for the 1919 eclipse to observe stars very close to our sun from our vantage point. So it was proposed that the sun's gravity was so strong near its surface that it would literally bend the light around it. The opportunity was ideal because there was a solar eclipse lasting around 6 minutes, whereas the one that we saw in Wyoming was only about 160 seconds. So comparing the angle of the Hades star cluster to stars further away from the sun, the limb of the sun, which is just the edge, we actually found that the relative distance had changed significantly enough to have warped our view and measured up with Einstein's formulas very nicely. Now, just a term that we mentioned earlier, syzygy. It's probably one of my favorite words. That's S-Y-Z-Y-G-Y. And in Scrabble, if you can swing it, I would play it. It's worth a lot of points. But it's when 3 or more celestial bodies line up. They don't have to be a straight line, but as long as there are 2 or more bodies in the way, that would count. As well as when all of the bodies, major bodies on one side of the sun are on one side. But now, there's also lunar eclipses as well, and it's a separate event, but it's nonetheless interesting. Instead of the Earth, Moon, and then Sun alignment, it is the Moon, Earth, Sun. And the same ecliptical phenomena would be visible from the Moon's perspective, because in this case, the solar eclipse is on the Moon. The difference being is that the Earth would appear 4 times larger in the sky than what we would see here from Earth. And the more surface to cover means that the Earth is longer, more frequent, and the difference is most apparent when you see, say, an eclipse shadowing Earth from space, where it only covers a tiny portion, but the Moon is engulfed entirely. And this phenomenon produces a faint red glow on the surface when it's considered full. And that's because of the reflected light from the Earth's atmosphere, which is the only light that makes its way to the Moon's surface and produces that distinct glow. It can also be a way to give insight into the qualities of Earth's atmosphere, although it's somewhat accurate. I always think it'd be very cool to be standing on the Moon during a lunar eclipse, because everything, it would look kind of like Mars during the nighttime. But yeah, that's just a couple of facts there. So Vincent, would you pick it up?
Yeah, so one of the most important things to remember about a solar eclipse is that you're looking directly at the sun.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do this with your eyes alone during totality when only the corona is visible. The rest of the time, you'll need proper PPE. We wore 2 layers of welding goggles so as to exceed the level 14 darkness you need to look at the sun. And we also had cardboard eclipse goggles that were distributed at stops along the way. You can look with equipment like this, or through an appropriately filtered telescope. You got to put it on the skyward end so that it protects you best. And then, or you can use a pinhole camera, or you can just sort of look at cool shadows on the ground. Because we even had that up here. It's, leaves had an interesting curve to them and things.
Yeah, very cool feature.
But don't look at the sun with your bare eyes. So the road trip started, as many road trips do, with a visit to customs. And then on the other side, we passed a little fair thing. Montana, even though it's nearby, is visibly different, because not quite all of it has been turned like we have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That makes Saskatchewan one of the more industrialized provinces technically because of the
Mhm.
agriculture sector, hey? Whereas Wyoming is just bare. It's like it has been untouched, rocky,
Yeah,
as you'd imagine.
but it's kind of nice.
Yeah.
Um, because and of course coming from Canada, you go down these like low level back road kind of things. Um,
Yeah,
Once
we
we've been
took
going for a while, we needed gas, and so we started to see places selling this wacky motorcycle merchandise. And apparently, there's like some sort of motorcycle event in South Dakota, and so people come from a long way to see that. And it wasn't that long before our Eclipse trip, and so they still had the merchandise on display. You could get your well dressed armadillo drinking a wine bottle.
That's right.
Gotta have that. But in order to find a place we could stay but still afford, we couldn't stay on the path of totality. So, because every road trip montage in a movie contains a stop at Mount Rushmore, we stayed in Rapid City, South Dakota. And it's noticeably the host city for a tourist path. But it's actually a nice place. And so we explored around town. In order to expand their shtick, they have bronze statues on every corner of various US presidents and a few local indigenous leaders. And we looked around, and these, some of the more popular ones, Roosevelt and Lincoln,
Mm-hmm.
Clinton and Jefferson. And I got pictures of most of them that I won't include because we could be here all day talking about your deep cut presidents, your Franklin Pierces and your Chester Arthurs. So you could just trust that we looked at them all and we'll move on. And we ended up doing a wine tasting and having supper in an old repurposed fire hall, the aptly named Firehouse Brewing Company. And then we, explored a little bit more after supper, saw these cool fountain lights. We saw them earlier. People were like running through them and jumping around, but
That's right. Yeah, it was good fun. A lot of people were, yeah, taking advantage of the local aesthetic. We certainly did.
but then we headed back to the hotel, and here's the city view before bedtime. But in the morning, we were, of course, on a deadline, as the eclipse was a little before lunchtime. So we were up early and made for Wyoming. But everybody else had the same idea. And so some of these roads started to see more traffic than they'd seen in a while. The view was pretty nice, though.
Oh, the view was brilliant. Yeah. Yeah. See here, right here, bumper to bumper traffic. And this was in the middle of nowhere. It was absolutely surreal. And we were going, we were going rather quickly because like we all were in a rather, a rush, right? But, we all did make it eventually. It was just a bit cramped for a while.
Yeah, we got to this little town and it's backed up
Mm-hmm.
here, and then it's also backed up going the other way, and a little rough for people trying to get through the intersection.
Yeah, okay.
And like you can see on this Google map, it was backed right up going to, Lusk, a little town. But we were stuck long enough, we were getting a little loopy, and so we started developing backstories for the other traffic. And this guy's Colorado Dad. He's busy a lot of the time, but he's taking this opportunity to bring his kid to see a very special event. It'll be a very meaningful memory for the both of them. And here goes Colorado Dad checking out the cool rocks in Wyoming. Yeah. I don't blame him. They're pretty cool. Yep. But the time's come. We're far enough south that we're in the path of totality and people are staking claim to some spots. And Colorado Dad was among them. He found a spot as soon as he could and ducked out of the traffic. We, however, pressed on because we had a destination in mind.
Yeah, it was absolutely hilarious, actually, to see because it was right at the line of where people knew that they could see the eclipse. And even though it may have been for the shortest amount of time, people were out there, kicking back with barbecues and tents and everything. People were, really making a big time out of it. And we certainly did too, but yeah, we had a destination. So
a long, long tailgate party in the middle of absolute nowhere. It was great. And we reached the town. We grabbed a nice local drink and some merch. Got my eclipse goggles, and we were almost there. We made it. As you see, the reason we picked this spot is that it was one of the main stops for covered wagons along the Oregon Trail, and a historic site seemed like as cool a place as any to watch an eclipse. Now, the Oregon Trail, if you've heard of it, played the game, etc., was a wagon trail in the 1800s U.S. that ran from Independence, Missouri to the Willamette Valley in Oregon. People, even unmarried women, could sign up to receive 160 acres of land that the U.S. government had decided they could just give out, so long as they'd promised to farm it. And people went down this trail with ox-pulled wagons and tried their hardest not to die from cholera, lightning, snakes, or their own deteriorating mental health. A lot of them failed and dumped out of the wagon directly onto the trail behind them. Other than the help of local indigenous people and a few key stops along the trail like this one, they were kind of on their own to survive on whatever they brought. Other people had the same idea, so we found a parking spot at the park and headed up the hill to find a good spot. In retrospect, we probably should have put some chairs in the car before we left Canada. This is a good tip for all of you going to check out the next one. Bring a chair.
Yeah, sitting is very important, for sure. Yeah,
and took our traveling mascot, Tweet Bison, had a look around with the goggles they gave us in town. It's a nice spot. Lots of people came to watch here and explore the site. And some of the buildings are restored, but others are original foundations that were left behind. Now this guy here looking at the sky with the binoculars is a regular at these. He gave us all the best tips for watching and told us about those he'd seen before and the ones coming next. Mm-hmm. And this is definitely a thing. There are lots of people who make a point of going to as many eclipses as they can. Because you know well in advance exactly where and when an event like this will happen. People will plan ahead and organize their lives around visiting the next one. And during totality, people will describe rapturous experiences, being overwhelmed by the experience in such a way that they enter a bit of a flow state, a clarity, losing track of time, losing their filter and sense of self to react in the moment. And you could go down a YouTube rabbit hole watching people react to eclipses. It's interesting.
I can definitely attest myself. It was definitely an experience to be had. Absolutely true.
And that eclipse has had this effect on people, regardless of whether we even know whether we knew what was happening at the time. Had been well documented for a long time. This image is from India in the 1700s of Krishna and his family looking at an eclipse.
Mm-hmm. And so, historically speaking, from the human perspective, although, depending on the observing culture, it often was represented in pop culture today with, say, South American cultures. And that represented a range of omens from world-ending foreboding doom to, say, godly threats of birth and renewal. They played a major role in ceremonial or shamanistic rites or of, say, indigenous peoples of the Aztec, Olmec, or the Maya. It was documented that long ago in many different ways that, say, the sun fell to the earth and scorched all mankind only to be reanimated from some godly magic. The eclipse appears as a reminder of the great past event, although the folklore is quite diverse. Say the event either embodied, say, serpently, feathery, parental qualities, any one of those, or and shouting was often a means of dispelling the alignment and the associated doom. And they've also been recorded in caves in America, in Renaissance art. They've been recorded as well as in Syria and China, dating back to over 3,000 years ago.
And so here, it's 11 something in the morning, but it's getting dimmer because it's almost entirely covered. The light changes and looks like a sunset on every horizon. One of the most interesting things about it is that, like, even just a slightly revealed bit of sun is still super bright. Like it was, just a differently colored day right until.
Yeah, that was the oddest part too. It's like you can clearly tell it's day, but it's like there's something off about it. It's like not completely. It's like quite honestly half as bright, or well, it eventually like went away completely, but that's where the sunset comes in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks like it's a sunset every horizon. The shadow will kind of encroach on you. It comes, you can see it coming, and there's
the wind.
Yeah, the wind. It's just sort of this whoosh of cool air, and it comes.
Temperature drops like 5-10 degrees easy in the moment.
And it's just it's lunchtime, the highest part of the day, like. But there it is. And at this point, we've been looking at it in a quick way for a while, keeping our eyes safe. And the goggles can't come off until totality. As I say, the sun there is mostly covered, but camera sees just a little bit of brightness, and there's the sun. And so I've got here a video that captures the reaction that we all had around there to reaching totality. But I'll warn you, a few of us get a little bit honest in their reaction because it's, as I say, it's a rapturous experience. You kind of with that lost sense of self, etc. So
there are liberties.
We get a bit excited.
I want to catch it on Snapchat, but I'm like, maybe I should just throw my phone out.
Snapchat's gonna be too quick.
Yeah.
Probably.
I'm just gonna film it.
Yeah. Well, what were your names again, guys? I forget again. Steven.
D-R-A-K.
And this is Vincent.
Yo.
Wait for it.
We are totality stoked.
I love that so much. We're waiting for the shadow to come in any second here.
I think it's like.
Yeah.
2 minutes? Right on, brother, right on. One person watching the shadow.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Who was the volunteer?
I'm on it.
I mean, I do not want to miss a shadow, so I'm.
Oh Lord, it's so dark right now.
It is.
We're gonna see the stars in a second, y'all.
Oh man.
Planet.
Oh man.
It's the middle of the day.
We're gonna see like opposite constellations too.
Oh yeah.
We're gonna see Orion. I'm gonna be able to see Orion. Holy.
Yep. So close.
The sun is disappearing.
Not much left now. You can see the crescent going away.
Look how cold it is right now. Isn't that
I'm
insane?
getting tired.
Yeah, I'm not holding it so high. I'm just holding it here. It doesn't really make too much
Big difference at all.
Here it comes. Oh. 1,000 miles an hour, it's racing towards us.
Wait for it.
There it is.
Oh look, there's a star. The first one that I've seen. Oh damn.
Oh,
Right,
sure
don't-
enough,
Yeah,
there
don't
it
look
is.
away, don't look
That
away.
might be Venus actually.
Oh yeah.
Might be a planet.
That's probably, yeah,
that's-
probably is. It's a
Sorry
little
about
bright. Okay, look at that real like darkness over the horizon.
Uh-huh.
Here it comes. Oh, look.
So fast.
Oh man.
Oh, Lord, look, it's changing. Everything's changing.
Oh,
Here it
look,
comes.
it's getting changed.
Oh,
This is it.
snap. There it is. Watch. Sunset everywhere. Sunset everywhere. Oh my God! Look at this, y'all. It's sunset all
that it?
around the horizon.
Is that it right there? You see it?
Oh yeah, look at it.
Darkening? Look at that. That's
Look
it.
at it.
Oh, look
She
at that.
comes.
That's crazy.
Oh snap. Oh look up, guys. Look up.
Oh, my Lord.
Oh! Yeah! Oh my God, look at that, Jack. Incredible. Oh, Vincent,
So good.
look at it. Oh my God.
So yeah,
Very. Yeah,
Oops.
it was. I think the biggest thing that I was trying to delegate whether to like watch with my own eyes or record, and I did a bunch of both, but because like preservation, I wanted to see keep some of this right and share with all of you, but it was definitely a crazy thing watching everything happen.
and like as much as anything, this is a recommendation that you should go and see the next one because there's a photo, but like it doesn't do it justice. I can comfortably say it was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, and you see one eclipse, you want to see the rest of the eclipses. So,
and even like a high definition photograph does not even compare to what you experience when you're there witnessing it. It's something magical. Yeah. So let's just talk a bit about the features of the eclipse itself. So on the left there, you can see an example of Baily's beads. This was first coined by Bailey, but first observed actually by Edmund Halley, the guy who discovered the comet in 1715. It refers to the diamond ring effect, as it's known, where the moon does not completely cover the sun, but does reveal distinct features of the sun's surface, which would include solar tornadoes, portions of the coronal ejecta, all of which are different forms of plasma. Now, the corona, which is more obvious on the right there, it's the most distinct features of an eclipse and is Latin for crown. The corona is a halo of charged particles that stream from the sun's surface, in contrast to the sun's surface, which is convecting hydrogen and helium at about 6,000 degrees Celsius. The corona is in excess of 1 million degrees. And it was only about last year when we received the best evidence for why this is so through the Parker Solar Probe, which was launched in 2018. Currently, it's approaching the sun at a distance of about 13.5 million kilometers, with a speed of about 450,000 kilometers an hour, which is the fastest man-made object to ever be sent into space relative to the sun. So effectively, it is heading right through the sun if the corona is the sun itself. But because of these microflares on the surface, tiny explosions and magnetic interactions, as well as trace amounts of heavier elements that are emitted from the surface, that contributes to this huge disparity in the temperature. Now, the corona changes in appearance all the time. The corona that we saw had, which is in fact this one here, it had 3 distinct legs of solar plasma. In comparing photographs to other eclipses, it makes it very easy to differentiate, which eclipse is which. So eclipses will have more brilliant or less so coronal features based on when they occur. And this is because the sun experiences an 11-year cycle of magnetic activity, which contributes to the amount of sunspots, coronal mass ejections, flares, and the overall activity of the star. The difference is staggering. And notably, we just hit the solar minimum, which means that in the coming decade, we'll see a ramping up of solar activity and a greater chance of spectacular eclipses. So Vincent, there we are.
Yeah, here we are with our new eclipse friends, Stephen and Drac from Colorado. It's always fun to meet these people with common interest when you go to these sorts of things. And here they are with more of our new Eclipse friends. And these guys are regulars that travel around. We were invited to go to Luxor, Egypt, and check out that eclipse. I think it's in 2028, 2027, something like that. But totality there is going to be for 6.5 minutes, and that's pretty intense. It'll be a great show, and on the upswing of the cycle, like you say. So
exactly.
the next one we should all be thinking about is coming up in 2024. So book your trips now, because you've got lots of options for checking out this eclipse. You'll be able to see a partial eclipse from here, but I really do recommend totality if you can swing it. In Canada, there's going to be totality sort of in the southeast part of Ontario, and it goes east and north from there. It'll hit Niagara Falls. That would be a cool place to watch. It's probably going to be packed. Kingston, Montreal, Fredericton, and up through central Newfoundland. Now, your best spot to watch with the longest duration of totality is the Durango State in Mexico. And then there are lots of spots through the US like Austin, Dallas, Indianapolis, and Cleveland. Another thing to be careful about is weather, because we got really lucky. But it's a wise move to book a place to stay that's a little bit out of the path and give yourself the option to drive somewhere else if the weather isn't going to cooperate in your plan A spot. Then you'll want to get appropriate filters if you want to use a telescope, get proper glasses for looking at eclipses, and don't mess around or you'll hurt yourself. And bring snacks, head for your spot early, fill your gas, because you might be in traffic for a while in both directions.
Which we were. And the chairs. Don't forget the chairs.
Don't forget the chairs. And the other point of watching it at a historic site was so we could visit the historic site. And so we explored it. Fort Laramie was one of the main stops on the Oregon Trail for a few reasons. It was where the Laramie River met the North Platte, so you could get water and also ford the river conveniently. And it was a trading post and an opportunity to get supplies. And it also had a hospital. So it was one of your comparatively few options to possibly survive whatever diseases or injuries you picked up along the way. And along the way, it also served as an army post in the U.S. government's quest to oust the local indigenous people from their land, and eventually had its soldiers shipped out to fight in the U.S. Civil War. And later, it was used as a staging point to fight the Lakota when they found gold and broke their treaty for the Black Hills. Once there was rail in place, they didn't need places for wagon trains to stop, and the fort fell out of use. And here's the ruin of the non-commissioned officer quarters. Here's another ruin building up around the hospital, but you have to be careful because it has snakes in it.
Caution snakes.
Yeah. And some of this fancy 1880s style plumbing, the trenches and wells. This creek is the Laramie River. It's a tributary of the North Platte River. And other people had the same idea and explored the site.
It was incredibly hot that day too, I remember.
Yeah, it cooled down nicely during the eclipse, but it picked back up.
Immediately, yeah.
Yeah. Bring a drink, that's another one. Near some of the buildings, like this cavalry barracks, have been restored so you can explore them. Here's another one. This is the surgeon's quarters. They dedicated this space as a historic site not really that long after they stopped using it, which was a bit of good foresight because they kept the ruins reasonably intact. And of course, here's Tweed Bison pulling the covered wagon. These wagons were pulled by oxen down the Oregon Trail. And if you've been keeping up with the ongoing story on the Swift Current Museum Twitter, Tweed Bison learned how to be an ox from the experts at the Ross Farm Museum in Nova Scotia in 2015. And the wagons on the trail were mostly like this because they had to be. Bigger wagons didn't hold up to the journey, so they had to be small like this. They only held 2,000 pounds, about 1,800 of which was the food they needed to survive the trip. And so typically people wouldn't ride in the wagon because it would make you sick and there wasn't really room. So they would walk beside for the whole 3,500 kilometer adventure. But as
An ox of all
base,
trades.
what?
I said an ox of all trades.
Yeah. And they fit a whole lot of people in these bunkhouses, all with their stuff hanging over the beds. And we stopped at the gift shop and picked up some good merch. We were ready to move on to the next stage of our trip. And because, of course, they, like the National Park Service, had their own set of goggles that you can use, and you had a little map because they wanted to, of course, encourage people to visit their sites for viewing. And there it is in the distance as we leave. This is like the early afternoon, so we've got plenty of day ahead. And off we tried to go, but traffic was even worse than it was on the way in. And Greg promptly took an interview request as we struggled our way through.
Yeah, that was a fun time. I got a little web page devoted to that, so that's fun. But and at the time I worked for the radio station, and they were very happy to have me be an interim correspondent. Oh, look, I'm 28 there. How long? I'm so young. Yeah, fun. Yeah.
But
yeah, what else was it? I think I remember, like, I wanted to call them like immediately after, but then it took like another hour and a half for them to get back to me, and the signal was awful. And that's neither here nor there, though.
It was a bit of a mess. We were waiting a while before that worked out, but
yeah, traffic though. Mm-hmm.
But Google was nice and told us a sneaky way to get around the next town, so we picked it up and kept going. And we went through Nebraska in an effort to A, beat the traffic, and B, say we had been to Nebraska. And so we saw some neat rocks in the background here. And there was a Walmart. And that was it for Nebraska. Because we really just clipped the corner. I'm sure they have other things. When we got back to Rapid City, we went mini golfing at this cool pirate place next to our hotel.
Which was a very impressive course, I'll say. Like, they had the whole, well, like there was even, I think, up here a slide of a skeleton. There was gold and everything. And it was a moderately challenging course, I'd say, but really interesting. It covered like a whole, street corner kind of thing.
Yeah, these waterfalls and all the best in plastic gold, and yeah,
it drew you in for sure.
Yeah. Then in the morning, we went to America's national tourist trap, Mount Rushmore. Mm-hmm. Now, it's an interesting place to see, but it's kind of a strange story because it's an unfinished stone carving that still has the pile of removed material sitting underneath it. And it was put in place as a strategy to attract tourists to South Dakota. And it sure worked. But this is problematic, first of all, because the mountain they chose was in the Black Hills. This is an area sacred to the Lakota, and it was theirs not only by right, but by treaty. But the U.S. broke the treaty only 6 years after they signed it, because they found gold. And then they later came in and carved the heads of their own leaders into the mountain. Eventually, the government recognized that this was unconstitutional, and they have $1 billion in reparations stored in the treasury for the Lakota people if they choose to take it. But they haven't taken it because they would reasonably just like to have their land back. But what South Dakota wanted for this project was a stone carving of cowboys, because it seemed like the theme of the area and all that. But they hired Gutzon Borglum to do it, who was notoriously difficult to work with. And other projects he'd done include the Stone Mountain Confederate Monument that he carved for the KKK in Georgia. And Borglum decided that rather than what he was asked to do, he was going to carve presidents. And so he chose Washington as the first, Jefferson as the one who wrote the Declaration of Independence, Lincoln as the one who ended slavery, and Roosevelt as a friend of his. And the full plan involved sculpting their heads and torsos, and inside them housing a hall of records that would contain documents like the US Constitution and Declaration of Independence. He'd only finished the heads when the government threatened to cut his funding for his plan going too far. But he died, and that was that. The workers stopped doing it and left it how it is. So anyway, we checked it out. It's pretty fun. They had a little ice cream booth that used a recipe they found among Thomas Jefferson's stuff. It was pretty tasty. And when you go in there are these arches with all the different state flags. Some of them are nice and well designed, and others, not so much, full of text and bit of nonsense like that. But there's the unfinished statue here with the rubble at the bottom from the construction. And it doesn't contain the Declaration of Independence. It doesn't contain the Constitution. That's a little bit small. Those are 60 feet. It's smaller than his Confederate monument. Take from that what you will.
Mm-hmm.
The mountain beside it is pretty nice. But
I often wonder that if they were supposed to be full figures, how close they would all be together, because they are relatively cramped there.
yeah, it's just like a series of suits all like jutting down, all this gravel kind of out of the way.
Yeah, and I will say as well that the town leading up into it really is the biggest tourist trap you'll ever see. Like,
it's amazing.
Yeah, there were people carving giant logs, like sculpting giant tree logs into bears and eagles and things, and the billboards. My God, the billboards! Although that was a theme throughout the entire trip. We didn't get too many because they kind of seemed, silly to take a picture of it. But in hindsight, some of them were too ridiculous not to make a mention of it.
Yeah, advertising every little thing you could think of on the way. Because they knew they had their captive audience. And then, they had a little area where you could go if you wanted to yell your opinions. Just guys sort of tripping over the sign, but. And we picked up some ridiculous merch that is now out of date on the way out. And so we head back. This is the Medicine Rock State Park in Montana. And it's a pretty cool looking place too. But we didn't have enough US cash left over, so we didn't go in.
Mm-hmm.
And we were almost there, going down the thing. But then they stopped us at the border, because that's what you do when a couple of scruffy dudes go down and tell you they're going to look at the sun for a while.
Yeah, that sounds suspicious to us.
Yeah. Plus your passport was about to expire the next day. So
no, it expired that day. Like the day we exited, it was technically expired, but they let us through. I think I called ahead and they're like, it would be no problem. Although we still got an eyebrow raise as we got a couple of those.
Well, they're not going to not let you into Canada.
Nah, they wouldn't. They wouldn't dare, would they? Yeah.
Yeah. That was our trip. It was a good time. And as I say, I recommend heartily to everyone that they
make the effort. Go for it.
Yeah. Head out to New Brunswick or something in a few years' time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll be there. I'll be there in New Brunswick. Close enough. Just a hop, skip, and a jump from where I'm at. Luckily enough. So should we open it up for questions, or how does?
Yeah, if anybody has anything they're wondering about, I'll put the link again. We've got a bunch more of these coming every Wednesday at the same time, going into March. So thanks for coming.
Thank you all.
Good job. Good job. It was very interesting. Thanks, Vincent. I enjoyed the video of the eclipse.
Yeah, it was really exciting. Like, you had really no idea what to expect, and kind of here's watching.
Yeah, I thought that the very interesting, well, for me, the most interesting part was, other than the eclipse itself, was the wind actually rushed towards the shadow, because like, you know, the more dense air, that's where the air goes, and so you're looking, it's like you're kind of being thrown into this experience. Is kind of how it felt. And what else? Especially like looking from, I don't think we saw any animals freak out or anything like that, although there were some deer or something in the background that were just kind of like, what? Kind of looking up or something. I remember distinctly some animal doing something kind of funny, but other than that, there was no birds around rushing or doing anything crazy. But it's nice to be reminiscent, nostalgic for this kind of thing, though. Yeah.
Yeah. There wasn't a lot of stuff to freak out either, because we were sort of out in the middle of a field with a bunch of humans. So anybody who would have been there,
yeah, we were making the most ruckus for sure.